There is a quiet tragedy that happens in the lives of many people, and most of them never even notice it. It does not arrive with noise. It does not break the door down like a storm. It does not warn you with a loud voice or a dramatic sign. It simply sits beside you while you live your ordinary days, and slowly, patiently it begins to take things away. Your focus, your discipline, your courage, your future. Years pass. Opportunities fade. The person you once believed you could become slowly dissolves into a distant idea. Not because the world defeated you, but because something inside you quietly worked against you. Marcus Aurelius once reminded himself that a man is rarely destroyed by the things outside his control. More often, he is undone by the unnoticed habits within him, the silent forces he refuses to examine. The strange truth about failure is this: it almost never feels like failure while it is happening. It feels comfortable. It feels normal. Sometimes it even feels deserved. And that is why the most dangerous enemies of success are not loud, dramatic, or obvious. They are silent. They live in the small choices you repeat every day, the thoughts you allow to grow unchecked, the excuses that seem harmless in the moment but slowly reshape the direction of your life. If you are honest with yourself for a moment, truly honest, you may already feel their presence, not as guilt, but as a quiet awareness. A feeling that somewhere along the way you began accepting you were less from yourself than you once did. And today we will speak about the 7 silent killers that slowly destroy a person's future, not as accusations, but as a mirror, because Stoicism was never about judging others, it was about examining one's own soul with courage and clarity. So let us begin with the first one. It is perhaps the most subtle of them all. Comfort. Not the kind that allows the body to rest after honest work. That kind of comfort is natural. The dangerous comfort is the kind, that replaces effort. It begins harmlessly. You tell yourself that today has been difficult. You deserve a break. Tomorrow will be the day you begin again. And tomorrow does arrive. But the same quiet voice appears once more. Just one more day. This is how years disappear. You see, the human mind has a remarkable ability to justify its own retreat from effort. It does not shout, "I am abandoning my potential." Instead, it whispers gentler sentences. You've done enough for now. You start when you feel ready. There is still plenty of time. Marcus Aurelius wrote many reminders to himself about this very trap. He often asked himself in the morning why he hesitated to rise from bed when he had been born to do the work of a human being. Not because he hated rest, but because he understood a dangerous truth about the mind. Left undisciplined, it will always drift toward the easiest path. Comfort is seductive because it disguises itself as kindness toward yourself. But in reality, it is often the quiet abandonment of your responsibilities. A farmer who refuses to work the land for a single season may still survive. But if he repeats that decision again and again, the soil slowly turns against him. The same is true for the soul. The discipline you ignore today does not disappear. It becomes the regret you meet later. There is a young man I once observed many years ago. He was talented, thoughtful, capable of far more than the life he eventually lived. At 20 years old, he spoke often about his ambitions. He wanted to write. He wanted to build something meaningful. He wanted to become someone his family could be proud of. His intentions were sincere. But intentions alone do not shape a life. Habits do. Each day he delayed the work he claimed to value most. Not dramatically, not rebelliously, quietly. He would tell himself he would start after one more evening of rest, one more distraction, one more day of preparation, one more moment before beginning. Weeks became months, months became years, and something strange began to happen. He stopped speaking about those ambitions entirely, not because they had disappeared, but because ignoring them had become easier than confronting them. This is the silent cruelty of comfort. It does not steal your future suddenly. It persuades you to surrender it slowly. Stoicism teaches something that modern life often tries to hide from us. Your potential is not something you automatically grow into. It is something you must protect with discipline. Because the world will constantly offer you easier alternatives, easier thoughts, easier lives. But ease is rarely where character is built. And character is the only foundation strong enough to hold success. Marcus Aurelius ruled an empire, commanded armies, and carried responsibilities that would break most people. Yet even he admitted that his greatest battle was not against enemies outside Rome. It was against the weakness inside himself, the desire to delay, the temptation to choose comfort over duty. If a Roman emperor struggled with this, then surely we should not be surprised that we struggle with it too. But Stoicism never allowed a man to hide behind that truth. Understanding your weakness was not an excuse, it was a responsibility. And this leads us to a difficult realization. Most people believe success is destroyed by dramatic mistakes, a catastrophic decision, a great failure, a moment of collapse. But more often success dies quietly. It dies in the mornings when you choose delay instead of discipline. It dies in the evenings when distraction replaces reflection. It dies in the small moments where you could have acted with purpose but chose comfort instead. These moments seem insignificant while they happen. But life is nothing more than the accumulation of such moments. This is why Stoic philosophy placed such importance on daily awareness. Marcus Aurelius would regularly ask himself a simple question. What did I do today that strengthened my character? Not his reputation, not his wealth, his character. Because he understood that a strong character could endure failure, loss, and hardship. But a weak character would collapse even when success was within reach. Comfort weakens character not because rest is wrong, but because it trains the mind to avoid effort, and a mind that avoids effort cannot build anything lasting. So the first silent killer of success is not laziness in the obvious sense. It is the quiet acceptance of comfort where effort should exist. And many people never recognize this enemy because it never appears as a threat. It appears as relief. But relief is not always freedom. Sometimes it is surrender. And if you listen closely to your own life, you may begin to notice where this surrender has quietly taken root, in the tasks you postpone, in the goals you once pursued but slowly abandoned, in the version of yourself that you once imagined becoming. The Stoics believed that awareness was the beginning of all transformation. Because you cannot correct a habit you refuse to see. So do not judge yourself harshly for the moments where comfort has distracted you from your path. Simply observe them, calmly, honestly. And then remember something Marcus Aurelius wrote to himself many times during difficult days. You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. Comfort loses its power the moment you see it clearly. But there are other silent enemies that work beside it. Enemies that quietly shape your thinking, your discipline, and your sense of responsibility. And most people spend their entire lives cooperating with them without realizing it. A second silent killer is far more deceptive because it hides behind something that appears wise, something society often praises, but in reality it quietly destroys a person's courage, and if we do not learn to recognize it early, it can imprison a new entire life. The second silent killer of success does not look like an enemy. In fact, many people believe it is a form of intelligence. They call it caution. They call it preparation. Sometimes they even call it wisdom. But in truth, it is something far more dangerous. It is the quiet habit of hesitation. Hesitation rarely announces itself as fear. It is too subtle for that. Fear at least forces a man to confront himself. Fear demands recognition. Hesitation does something different. Disguises itself as careful thinking. A person who hesitates often tells himself he is simply waiting for the right moment. He studies, he plans, he observes, he considers every possible outcome, and on the surface this appears responsible, but beneath the surface something else is happening. Life is moving forward without him. Marcus Aurelius once reflected that many people spend their lives preparing to live, rather than actually living. They stand at the edge of action, endlessly examining the water, but never stepping in. This habit can feel strangely comfortable. After all, when you delay action, you protect yourself from failure. If you never begin the journey, you never risk falling along the road. But the Stoics understood something that most people prefer not to face. Avoiding failure does not create success. It only creates stagnation. There was a merchant in an old coastal town who spent many years speaking about a voyage he intended to take. He had studied trade routes, carefully. He knew the markets of distant cities. He had calculated the profits that might be made from spices, fabrics, and rare metals. He was not an ignorant man. He understood opportunity. He simply never left the harbor. Each season he would say the same thing. The timing is not yet right. Perhaps the weather would improve next year. Perhaps the markets would shift in his favor. Perhaps the risks would become smaller. But the sea does not wait for perfect conditions. Years passed, Other merchants sailed where he had only imagined sailing. They returned with experience, wealth, and stories that reshaped the town's economy. Meanwhile, the man who had once understood the opportunity remained exactly where he began, still calculating, still preparing, still waiting for certainty. And certainty never arrived. This is the quiet prison of hesitation. It convinces you that you are being thoughtful when in reality you are avoiding responsibility. Marcus Aurelius often reminded himself that life is astonishingly short. Not in a dramatic way, but in a practical one. A human life, when viewed honestly, contains a limited number of mornings where meaningful action can begin. The tragedy is not that life ends. The tragedy is how many of those mornings are spent waiting to feel confident, waiting to feel motivated, waiting to feel ready. But readiness is a strange illusion. Most of the meaningful actions in a person's life are taken before he feels completely prepared. The soldier does not wait until courage feels perfect. The artist does not wait until inspiration becomes guaranteed. The leader does not wait until every uncertainty disappears. They move forward while uncertainty still exists, not recklessly, but decisively. Stoicism does not encourage impulsive behavior. It encourages clear thinking followed by deliberate action. There is a difference between reflection and hesitation. Reflection sharpens the mind. Hesitation weakens the will. Stoics believe that when reason has done its work, action must follow. Otherwise, reason becomes nothing more than decoration. Consider how often people say they are thinking deeply about their future. They research new careers. They explore business ideas. They consider creative ambitions. They reflect on the person they wish to become. But reflection alone does not transform a life. Action does, and action always contains discomfort, contains uncertainty. It contains the possibility of failure. This is why hesitation becomes such a powerful silent killer of success. It protects the ego while quietly starving the future. A person who never acts never has to confront the painful lessons of failure. But he also never gains the strength that those lessons provide. Marcus Aurelius wrote frequently about the importance of accepting discomfort as part of the human experience. He believed that avoiding difficulty was one of the fastest ways to weaken the soul. Through resistance. Just as a muscle grows through strain. Imagine a man standing before a heavy door. On the other side of that door are opportunities, challenges, growth, and responsibility. Opening the door requires effort. So he studies the door. He examines the handle. He considers whether the room beyond it might contain dangers. Days pass, then weeks. Eventually, the man becomes so accustomed to studying the door that he forgets the purpose of opening it. This is what hesitation does. It turns preparation into a permanent state, and life becomes an endless rehearsal that never leads to performance. Stoicism invites us to look at this habit with honest eyes, not with shame, but with clarity. Ask yourself a simple question. What in your life have you been preparing to begin for far too long? Perhaps it is a skill you wish to learn. Perhaps it is a responsibility you know you must accept. Perhaps it is a conversation you have been avoiding. Or a dream that you continue to delay because you believe the right moment will arrive someday. But time has a strange relationship with hesitation. The longer you wait, the heavier the first step becomes. The mind begins to create larger and larger obstacles. What once seemed like a small action begins to feel overwhelming. And eventually the mind whispers something even more dangerous. Perhaps it was never meant for you. But often that is not the truth. The truth is simply that hesitation has quietly grown stronger than your willingness to act. Marcus Aurelius fought this tendency within himself constantly. Even as emperor surrounded by immense responsibility, he had to remind himself that delay was rarely helpful. He wrote a simple question in his private journal. If not now, when? It is a question that cuts through hesitation like a blade through fog. If not now, when will you begin the work that you already know matters? If not now, when will you accept the discomfort that growth requires? If not now, when will you move toward the person you once promised yourself you would become? The Stoics believed that clarity about time creates urgency, not panic, but urgency. They understood that every day carries a quiet responsibility, not to achieve greatness immediately, but to move forward honestly. Even a small step taken with courage is more valuable than years spent in hesitation. Because movement strengthens the will, and the will, once strengthened, begins to transform everything else. Hesitation rarely works alone. It often walks beside another silent force. a force that slowly weakens discipline and steals focus from the mind. At first it feels harmless. Sometimes it even feels entertaining. But over time it quietly dissolves the ability to concentrate, to reflect deeply, and to build anything meaningful. And in the modern world, this third silent killer has become more powerful than ever before. The third silent killer of success rarely feels dangerous while it is happening. In fact, most people welcome it. They invite it into their mornings, their afternoons, and their evenings. They carry it in their pockets, place it beside their beds, and turn to it whenever the mind begins to feel restless. It is distraction. Not the obvious kind that completely derails a life in a dramatic moment, but the quiet, constant stream of small distractions that slowly dissolves a person's ability to focus. Marcus Aurelius lived in a world without the endless noise that surrounds us today. Yet even in his time he warned himself about the danger of scattered attention. He wrote that a man who allows his mind to wander endlessly becomes a stranger to his own purpose, and purpose, once lost, is not easily rediscovered. Distraction is powerful because it does not appear destructive. It feels harmless, a few moments of entertainment, a brief escape from effort, a quick glance at something interesting. None of these seem dangerous on their own. But life is not shaped by single moments. It is shaped by repetition. When the mind becomes accustomed to constant distraction, something subtle begins to change. Deep thinking becomes difficult. Sustained effort feels exhausting. Silence becomes uncomfortable. The mind begins to crave stimulation the way the body craves sugar. Quick, easy, immediate. And the cost of this habit is rarely noticed until much later. Imagine a craftsman working on a piece of intricate woodwork. The design requires patience, precision, hours of quiet attention. But every few minutes the craftsman steps away. He checks something else. He allows his focus to scatter. He interrupts the rhythm of concentration again and again. The work never reaches its full beauty, not because the craftsman lacks talent, but because his attention has been broken too many times. This is what distraction does to a human life. It fractures the mind, and a fractured mind struggles to build anything meaningful. The Stoics believed that attention was one of the most valuable resources a person possesses. Where your attention goes, your life follows. Marcus Aurelius often reminded himself to return his thoughts to the present moment. Not because the present moment is always pleasant, but because it is the only place where action is possible. A distracted mind drifts endlessly between past regrets and future worries, never fully inhabiting the moment where discipline must be practiced. In the modern world, distraction has become so common that many people no longer recognize it as a problem. They believe they are simply relaxing. But there is a difference between rest and distraction. Rest restores the mind. Distraction fragments it. True rest allows you to return to your work with renewed strength. Distraction leaves the mind foggy and restless, craving more stimulation but gaining no clarity. There was once a young scholar who studied philosophy under an older teacher known for his calm presence. The student admired the teacher's discipline and focus. Whenever he visited the teacher's study, he found the same quiet scene: a wooden desk, a few simple books, a window where sunlight entered softly. The teacher would sit for hours, reading, reflecting, and writing without interruption. One day, the student asked him a question. "How do you maintain such concentration?" "My mind wanders constantly. Even when I wish to study, I find myself searching for something else to occupy my attention." The teacher smiled, gently, and replied with a question of his own. "When your mind wanders, where does it go?" The student thought for a moment. "Everywhere," he admitted. "I look for something interesting, something entertaining, something easier than the work before me." The teacher nodded. "And does that wandering make you stronger?" The student hesitated. "No," he said quietly. The teacher leaned back in his chair. "Then you must learn something that few people truly understand. Attention is a form of discipline, and discipline, like all virtues, must be practiced." The student listened carefully. "Most people believe their problem is a lack of motivation," the teacher continued. "But often the real problem is that their attention has been trained to expect constant stimulation. This is one of the quiet tragedies of modern life. The mind is rarely allowed to become still. Moments of silence are quickly filled with noise. Moments of boredom are immediately replaced with entertainment. Boredom once served an important purpose. It created space for reflection. It forced the mind to look inward. Marcus Aurelius valued these quiet moments deeply. In his writings, he often returned to the idea that the soul becomes stronger when it learns to sit with itself. A distracted mind avoids this encounter. It runs from silence. It fears stillness. But the Stoics believe that stillness is where clarity begins. When the mind is not constantly chasing stimulation, it begins to see things differently. It notices patterns in behavior. It recognizes weaknesses that once went unnoticed. It begins to understand the direction of one's own life. And once clarity arrives, responsibility follows. This is why distraction is such a powerful silent killer. It prevents clarity from ever appearing. A distracted mind never pauses long enough to ask difficult questions. Am I moving toward the person I wish to become? Am I using my time wisely? Am I living with discipline or simply drifting from one moment of entertainment to the next? Without reflection, these questions remain unasked, and a life without reflection gradually loses direction. Marcus Aurelius wrote that the quality of a man's life depends largely on the quality of his thoughts. But thoughts require attention. Without attention, the mind becomes a chaotic stream of impulses rather than a tool for understanding. Think about how many hours disappear each week in moments that feel insignificant. A few minutes here, another few minutes there. Small distractions that seem harmless individually. But together they form a powerful current pulling your life away from its intended course. The Stoics would not respond to this realization with anger or self-condemnation. They would respond with awareness. Because awareness is the beginning of control. If you begin to observe your attention carefully, you will notice patterns, moments when the mind seeks distraction instead of effort, moments when silence feels uncomfortable, moments when the easier path quietly replaces the meaningful one. Do not judge these moments harshly. Simply notice them, because the moment you notice a habit clearly, you gain the ability to change it. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself often that the mind is capable of returning to discipline at any moment. Not tomorrow, not next year, now. The present moment is always available for correction. And when you reclaim your attention, something remarkable begins to happen. Thinking becomes clearer. Your actions become more deliberate. Your life begins to move with direction again. But distraction often hides something deeper beneath it. Something even more dangerous. Because while distraction weakens focus, the fourth silent killer quietly erodes something far more important. Your belief in your own responsibility. And once that belief begins to fade, a person can slowly begin to surrender control of their entire life without even realizing it. The fourth silent killer of success rarely begins with a dramatic decision. No one wakes up one morning and consciously chooses to surrender responsibility for their life. It happens slowly, quietly, almost politely. At first it feels like explanation. A person looks at the difficulties around him and begins to describe them. The circumstances were not ideal. The opportunities were uneven. The world seemed unfair in certain moments. And often these observations are not entirely wrong. Life does contain unfairness. Some people begin their journey with advantages others never receive. Some paths contain obstacles that seem almost unreasonable. The Stoics never denied this reality. Marcus Aurelius ruled during times of war, plague, political tension, and constant uncertainty. He understood better than most people that the world rarely arranges itself for our comfort. But he also understood something that protected his mind from bitterness. He believed that circumstances may influence a life. They do not define the character of the person living it. This is where the fourth silent killer begins to reveal itself. Blame, not the honest recognition that something unfortunate has occurred, but the quiet habit of placing responsibility for your future entirely outside yourself. Blame is seductive because it provides relief. If the world is responsible for your struggles, then you are no longer required to confront your own decisions. If other people are the cause of your difficulties, your role in shaping your future begins to feel smaller. And slowly, almost invisibly, the mind begins to step away from its own authority. Marcus Aurelius often reminded himself that the events of life are not fully under our control, but our response to those events always remains within our reach. This distinction became one of the central ideas of Stoic philosophy. There are things outside your control, and there are things within it. Wisdom begins when you learn to separate the two. Blame confuses this separation. It encourages the mind to focus endlessly on what cannot be changed. The past, other people, unfair circumstances, lost opportunities. While attention is trapped in these places, something important quietly disappears. The ability to act. There was once a man who lived in a small city where opportunities seemed limited. He often spoke about the advantages others possessed. Some had wealthy families, some had powerful connections, some had simply been born into better conditions. And many of his observations were accurate. Life had not offered him the easiest path. But over time, something began to happen. Each time he spoke about these disadvantages, his sense of responsibility for his own actions became smaller. He stopped asking himself difficult questions. What skills could he develop? What risks could he take? What efforts might change the direction of his future? Instead, his energy went toward explaining why progress was difficult. Eventually, explanation replaced action. Years passed. The circumstances he once described remained largely the same. But something else had changed. His belief that he could shape his own life had slowly faded. This is the quiet damage that blame creates. It convinces you that your story has already been written by forces outside your control. And if the story is already written, why struggle to change it? Marcus Aurelius refused to accept this kind of thinking. Even as emperor, he constantly reminded himself that responsibility begins with the self. He could not control every event in the empire, but he could control the integrity of his own actions. He could choose discipline. He could choose fairness. He could choose courage when difficult decisions had to be made. This perspective gave him something powerful: freedom, not the freedom to control everything, but the freedom to control himself. The Stoics believed that this was the highest form of power a human being could possess. Because when you take full responsibility for your actions, the world loses its ability to paralyze you. Circumstances may still be difficult. Obstacles may still appear, but your response becomes a matter of choice rather than helplessness. Blame removes this power. It slowly teaches the mind to look outward instead of inward. Instead of asking, "What can I do next?" the mind begins asking, "Why has this happened to me?" The difference between these two questions may seem small, but the direction of a life often depends on it. One question leads to reflection and action. The other leads to resentment and stagnation. Marcus Aurelius often wrote reminders to himself about this exact temptation. Even as a ruler surrounded by advisors, enemies, and unpredictable events, he refused to let his mind fall into the trap of blame. He would remind himself that every challenge contained an opportunity to practice virtue, patience, discipline, courage, wisdom. If someone acted unjustly toward him, he reminded himself that he still had the choice to act with fairness. If circumstances became difficult, he reminded himself that difficulty was the training ground of character. In this way, he protected his mind from becoming weak, because blame weakens the soul, not in a loud, obvious way, but gradually. A person who constantly blames external forces slowly stops examining himself, and self-examination is the foundation of growth. Without it, mistakes repeat themselves, habits remain unchallenged, weaknesses quietly grow stronger. Stoicism does not demand perfection. The Stoics understood that human beings are flawed, emotional, and sometimes inconsistent. What they demanded was honesty, the courage to look inward and ask difficult questions about one's own conduct. Where could I have acted better? Where did I allow fear to guide my decisions? Where did I surrender responsibility when I should have accepted it? These questions are uncomfortable, but discomfort of you carries truth. And truth, even when it is difficult, creates strength. Imagine two individuals facing the same setback. Both encounter failure. Both feel disappointment. One of them immediately searches for someone to blame. The system was unfair. The timing was wrong. Others interfered. The other individual pauses. He acknowledges the unfairness of the situation. But then he asks a different question. What can this experience teach me? This question does not erase the difficulty, but it transforms it. Failure becomes information rather than defeat. The mind remains active instead of bitter. Responsibility returns. And with responsibility comes the possibility of growth. This is the quiet strength Stoicism encourages, not the denial of hardship, but the refusal to surrender control of your character. Because success is not built only through talent or opportunity, it is built through ownership. Ownership of your actions, ownership of your decisions, ownership of the direction your life is moving. Blame erodes this ownership slowly, until one day a person wakes up and realizes that years have passed without meaningful progress. Not because change was impossible, but because responsibility was quietly given away. Marcus Aurelius understood that every human life contains limitations, but he also believed that within those limitations, enormous freedom still exists. the freedom to improve your character, the freedom to act with discipline, the freedom to shake your mind, and perhaps most importantly, the freedom to choose responsibility instead of blame. But there is still another silent enemy waiting beyond this one, an enemy that does not steal responsibility. Instead, it slowly steals belief. Because once a person begins to doubt his own potential, even discipline can begin to weaken. And that fifth silent killer often arrives so quietly that many people do not recognize it until their ambitions have already begun to fade. The fifth silent killer of success does not shout. It does not arrive with chaos or destruction. It enters the mind in a voice so quiet that many people mistake it for truth. It is doubt. Not the healthy doubt that questions ideas and sharpens thinking, but the deeper kind. The kind that slowly convinces a person that the life he once imagined may not be meant for him after all. At first it appears harmless, a small thought during a difficult moment. Perhaps I am not capable of this. Then the thought returns again when another challenge appears. Maybe others are simply more suited for this path. Over time the voice becomes familiar. It begins to speak more often and with greater confidence. And the most dangerous part is that the mind begins to listen. Marcus Aurelius often wrote to himself about the strange way the human mind can become its own obstacle. He believed that many limitations are not imposed by the world but constructed quietly inside our own thinking. The mind is powerful, but it is also impressionable. What you repeat to yourself eventually becomes something you believe, and what you believe eventually shapes what you attempt. Imagine a young archer standing before a distant target. In the beginning, he practices with patience. His aim improves slowly, arrow by arrow. But after missing several times, a quiet thought appears. You may not be skilled enough. At first, the archer ignores it. But if the thought returns again and again, something subtle begins to change. His posture tightens. His hands become less steady. His attention shifts from the target to the fear of missing it again. Soon the arrows begin to miss not because the archer lacks skill, but because doubt has weakened his focus. This is how belief works. It shapes the way we approach effort. A person who believes improvement is possible continues to practice. A person who believes failure is inevitable eventually stops trying. And when effort stops, potential slowly fades. Marcus Aurelius warned himself about this very habit. Even as a leader responsible for enormous decisions, he reminded himself that the mind must be trained to remain steady. He wrote that the soul becomes colored by its thoughts. If you allow thoughts of weakness to repeat themselves endlessly, they begin to stain your character. But if you discipline the mind to return to courage, patience, and reason, the soul gradually becomes stronger. The Stoics believed that belief should be built upon action rather than emotion. You do not wait to feel confident before acting. You act with discipline, and confidence follows, because confidence is not magic. It is memory. It is the quiet knowledge that you have faced difficulty before and continued anyway. This is why doubt becomes such a dangerous silent killer of success. It convinces a person to abandon effort before the evidence of his potential has fully appeared. There was once a sculptor who spent years learning his craft. In the early days, his work was rough. The lines were uneven, the shapes lacked refinement, but he continued practicing. Slowly, the stone began to respond differently to his hands. The sculptures grew more balanced. The details became sharper. Yet during this long process, doubt visited him often. Sometimes he would look at the unfinished stone and wonder if the vision in his mind could truly be brought into reality. But each time doubt appeared, he returned to the same simple principle. He continued carving, day after day, piece by piece, and something remarkable eventually happened. The sculptures that once existed only in imagination began to stand before him in stone. This is the quiet lesson that Stoicism tries to teach. The mind often doubts what the hands have not yet proven. But effort has a way of revealing possibilities that doubt cannot imagine. Marcus Aurelius believed that human beings possess an extraordinary capacity for growth, not because life is easy, but because the mind, when properly disciplined, can endure difficulty and continue forward. Yet even beyond doubt, there are two final silent killers that quietly shape the direction of a life. They are closely related. The sixth silent killer is impatience, and the seventh is forgetting who you are trying to become. Impatience is subtle because modern life encourages it constantly. We are taught to expect rapid results, immediate progress, instant transformation. But character does not grow quickly. Neither does mastery. Marcus Aurelius ruled the Roman Empire for nearly 2 decades, yet even he described his progress in wisdom as slow and imperfect. He wrote his reflections not as a finished philosopher, but as a student still learning discipline. This humility reveals something important. The most meaningful growth in a human life often happens quietly, over long periods of time, but impatience interrupts this process. A person begins working toward a goal. Weeks pass. Months pass. The results are smaller than expected. And the mind whispers again, perhaps this effort is not worth it. So the effort stops. A new goal appears. Another attempt begins. Then it stops again. Years can disappear in this cycle, not because the person lacked ability, but because patience was never given enough time to reveal the results of discipline. The Stoics understood that meaningful work must often be done without immediate reward. The farmer plants seeds knowing that the harvest will come later. The builder lays foundations long before the structure becomes visible. And the person who builds character must practice virtue day after day before the transformation becomes clear. Patience protects effort. Without it, discipline collapses under the pressure of time. And this leads us to the final silent killer, forgetting who you intended to become. This may sound strange at first, but it happens more often than people realize. When we are young, we often carry a clear sense of direction. We imagine the kind of person we want to be. Someone disciplined, someone courageous, someone capable of contributing something meaningful to the world. But as life becomes busy and distractions grow louder, that vision can slowly fade. Responsibilities appear. Comfort becomes appealing. The days begin to pass without reflection. And eventually, the person you once hoped to become becomes a distant memory. Marcus Aurelius fought against this forgetting constantly. In his private writings, he returned again and again to the same question. What kind of person should I be today? Not tomorrow, not in some distant future. Today, because character is built in daily decisions, in small actions repeated with consistency, in moments where you choose discipline instead of comfort, courage instead of hesitation, responsibility instead of blame, focus instead of distraction, belief instead of doubt, patience instead of impatience, and remembrance instead of forgetfulness. These are the quiet battles that shape every human life. The world may never notice them, but the person you become will be defined by them. The 7 silent killers of success do not appear as enemies standing before you. They appear as habits, as thoughts, as subtle choices repeated across years. But the Stoics believe something powerful. What is built through habit can also be rebuilt through habit. You are not trapped by the patterns of your past. At any moment, awareness can return. And with awareness comes the ability to choose again. Marcus Aurelius once wrote that a person's life is what his thoughts make of it. If this is true, then every day offers a quiet opportunity, an opportunity to reclaim your attention, to accept responsibility, practice patience, to act with discipline, and to move one step closer to the person you once believed you could become, not through dramatic change, but through steady effort, through calm reflection, through the quiet strength of self-mastery. And if these reflections have spoken to something inside you, a part of you that still values discipline, character, and inner control, then continue walking this path with us. This channel, built by Stoicism, exists for those who believe that true success begins within the mind. If you wish to continue strengthening that mind, subscribe, reflect deeply, and return often, because the work of building yourself is never finished, but it is always worth doing.